I am honored to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Carmen Tafolla, to Texas State University, and am happy to say that as a national member of the Tomas Rivera Mexican American Children's Book Award Committee, which I think a few of you may have been at a function earlier today, that in fact is just getting out. She is no stranger to our campus. Known as one of the madrinas of Chicana and Chicano literature, Dr. Tafolla has been writing since the early years of the Chicana movement. And I say Chicana because she has always written from a mujerista perspective that simultaneously challenges ethnic, gender, and class discrimination. A native of San Antonio's West Side barrios, her writing truly expresses the cultural and linguistic practices and experiences of Texas's bilingual and bicultural Mexico-Americanos. The first time I saw Carmen at a conference in San Antonio, she was the keynote speaker at a dinner. As she was being introduced, I, and the rest of the audience, noticed a disruptive viejita wandering around the elegant tables. Leave it to Carmen. In addition to written text, she is part of a small group of Latinas who incorporate dramatic and theatrical performances into their writing. Her costumes reflect the many voices you will find in her prose, and I hope you get a chance to see her perform sometime, if you have not already. I will never forget the way she can make you feel and help you reflect on the good, the bad, the funny, and the ugly of the human experience. Thank you very much, Carmen. As expected, I suppose I should say something about Dr. Tafolla's outstanding achievements. She began publishing by 1976 and received her PhD from the University of Texas Longhorns in 1982. She has held numerous faculty and administrative positions in Texas and throughout the Southwest, and is an internationally acclaimed writer, performer, and educational consultant. She has received many honors, including the Outstanding Young Women of America, Foremost Women of the 20th Century, the National Association for Chicana and Chicano Studies, and the Dictionary of International Biography. Her writing includes 5 books of poetry, 11 children's books, 2 in 2008, with this one makes 3, in 2008, 7 television screenplays, a co-authored feature-length film comedy entitled Real Men and Other Miracles. I haven't seen that yet, but I hope it sounds very interesting, and a nonfiction volume as well. Many of her stories and poems have been included in elementary, high school, and college-level readers and textbooks. Most recently, she has published the collection of short stories which we are celebrating today, The Holy Tortilla and a Pot of Beans. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carmen Tafolla.
Thanks. Soy chaparrita, so I need it down here. It's a delight to be with you all here today at Texas State, this place that carries so much tradición de nuestra gente. This was one of the places where there was first a group of Chicana women who were college graduates in the very, very early years, the 19-teens and the 1920s and the 1930s. And we don't hear a lot about that. And I keep telling other young writers, somebody needs to make this book. I got all the material and nobody volunteers. And they keep saying, well, we're waiting. So maybe I'll get to it, or maybe one of you will call me and volunteer to make the book, and I'll pass you the information, because there's a beautiful, beautiful history that goes with this spot right here on the hill, going all the way back to the early days of Chicana higher education. I'd like to share with you today some pieces of prose from the Holy Tortilla and a pot of beans. And people ask me where I came up with that crazy title. And I said, well, I don't know, except that life is not just holy or just profane. It's this crazy mix to where the most everyday, simple things end up the most miraculous and the most holy. And sometimes those things that are supposed to be the most holy end up very mundane. So I'm going to start with something that's almost not a short story. It is a list of mistakes. And it's almost not fiction either, because it's based on the life of a friend of mine, Barbara. When I wrote this thing, it came to me and I just jotted it all down, and then I called her and I said, Barbara, I have something you have to hear. And I read it to her and she said, yep, that's my life. And I said, can I publish it? I mean, I felt like I was plagiarizing. Can I publish your life? You know, it's only 2 pages long, but can I publish this? And she said, sure. So this is dedicated to Barbara. The title is almost longer than the piece, the list. And it's called How I Got into Big Trouble and the Mistakes I Made in Increasing Order of Importance. Mistake number 1. First, I fell in love with my priest. That was enough right there. But then I made mistake number 2. Mistake number 2. I told my parents that I fell in love with my priest. My parents got very mad. Mistake number 3. I told my priest that I fell in love with my priest. He already knew. Told me he was in love with me too. My parents told me it was all my fault. Mistake number 4. We tried to figure out a way to make it work. Asked the church if he could leave the priesthood to get married. Waited for permission. They didn't give it. He left anyway. We got married by a judge. My parents quit talking to me. Mistake number 5. Asked the church what we could do to have a full church wedding. They said it wasn't possible. Asked if they could at least give the marriage their blessing. They said it wasn't possible. Asked if they could give a sort of kind of half blessing. Asked every week for 8 months solid, and finally they figured out a way. But we had to promise to tell no one, and the church records were sealed in confidentiality. Got our half blessing. My parents said that 19-year-old muchachas locas should never be allowed in the congregations of 30-year-old attractive single priests. I just shrugged my by then pregnant shoulders and said I didn't know any priests who weren't single. They ignored me. Mistake number 6. We kept thinking we needed to do the right thing and be married fully in the eyes of the church. The church made us fill out 1,000 forms and talk to 100 officials and make 10,000 separate vows, including that we would never tell anyone. We didn't, except for my parents. My parents started talking to me again, but probably just because their 1-year-old granddaughter was already part of the wedding party. Mistake number 7. Tried to celebrate our anniversary. We had by then 3 different wedding dates and 2 children. The children were a lot less confusing than the wedding dates. One of the weddings had been so secret, we couldn't even remember the date of it anymore. Oh well, happy anniversary anyway, whenever it is. My parents at least agree that he's a very good man. They've always loved their priest. It's me they're not so sure about. Mistake number 8. He tried to find a job. It's not that he didn't have talents galore. It's just that I kept asking, well, what would you like to do? And what he would like to do was be a priest. Manager of a Kmart couldn't compare. For 3 years after I'd finished my nursing degree, he was even a house husband. Did a great job, and the kids were delighted. He sewed up down jackets on the sewing machine and repaneled the den. But underneath, he knew it was a job on a mommy track and a sure thing dead end once they graduated. Mistake number 9, they graduated. He turned to drink. Just beers and social settings to start with, but sopping drunk fog out sprawled on the living room couch at the inn. I'd get home from work and they'd get home from college and the smell of wine would hit us at the front door. Just reliving the transubstantiation of Christ in communion over and over again, I guess. My parents started patting me on the back, saying things like, "Be strong, mija," and lighting candles for me. Mistake number 10. I went to church, heard a sermon about the evils of overindulgence and the selfishness of intoxication. I got tired of never being able to use my living room couch, told my parents that I was getting a divorce. They put out their candles and decided to quit trying to understand me. Maybe I was just born bad. Mistake number 11. No more. Quit counting. This is my life. Come on, I'm serious. I married a patient of mine. Wonderful man with a kind heart. Kind heart, but weak heart. In fact, he was waiting for a heart transplant. We didn't even try for the church. Married in the hospital where I worked. He was still in the hospital bed. Signed 2 pieces of paper and just take the marriage and go. But this time, I remembered my anniversary with no problem, and we celebrated every month. Mija, that man could die at any minute. You're making a big mistake. No, Mama, no more mistakes. I'm the judge, I'm the jury, I'm the church, and I'm giving me a full blessing. So that's how I got into big trouble. The title piece of the book is The Holy Tortilla. And it was kind of inspired by this wonderful part of the world that we live in, and all the magic and the milagros that we see all around us. So with your permission, I will read The Holy Tortilla. It was rather plain as a baby. Just a little kernel of corn on a boring stalk in a hot field with cracked dry dirt and too many brown tip leaves. No one would have ever guessed that it would change forever the history of South Texas. Right from the very moment the kernel sprouted on the cob, the ear of corn started acting differently. The ear spoke strange things at odd moments, saw things others did not see, turned to face the moon instead of the sun, answered questions that were never asked, and was quiet when it was time to agree with the others. Even the stalk noticed. Que rara, she thought that ear had always acted muy correcta before. It's probably just a bug. And behind her back, the other stalks began to say the same of her. Since corn stalks were always intent on serenity, they tried to ignore the oddities now happening in the universe, but they could see clearly that new stars appeared nightly in the skies. New voices were heard whispering through the wind. They were omens, really, but everyone tried not to notice. It's because of the funny weather, the stalk made excuses weakly, when her tender light green corn silk began to be streaked with a blood purple. Then the stalks near her began to recede, to grow away, till soon there was a circle, a clear space around her, surrounded by stalks that grew out and away and then arched back towards her as if they were bowing. She stayed calmada, never one to overreact. The ear, who had a funny intuition about it all, began to grow extra thick shucks around herself for protection, just in case. In case of what, she didn't know, but she sensed inside her a deep hunger for meaning, and her soul secretly shivered at the beauty of her own purple silk. Other than all of that, though, life was pretty normal. There was a strange story or two that the other stalks passed like gossip between them, hesitantly on the early summer nights. But through all of it, no one blamed the colonel. No one even really noticed it at all, not until the day when the señora who owned the molino came to harvest some of her corn, and the ear of corn was cut. The stalks felt it instantly. Then suddenly, everything was different. The ears were taken to a building and stripped of their shucks. Then they were laid on a rough cutting board where the kernels were cut off with a knife and ground in a modern metal thing, not as pretty or efficient as a metate, but effective anyway. The fresh and fragrant young kernels went in one end of the metal thing and came out at soft, smooth masa at the other end. The man with rippling arms picked up the spackleware tub from under the spout of the metal thing and carried it to a table where a young girl's dark brown hands scooped the moist masa up onto a scale and from there into a bag. The small molino packaged the masa in a clear plastic bag with a twist tie and a plain white label reading, Eva's Tortillas, Alma Seca, Texas, in black print. The woman in the faded cotton house dress had just finished listening to a rerun of the novela Amor Inocente, her favorite, on the radio when she opened the package to start supper. The children were nearby watching the TV as the first of the masa was patted into a round, pleasant-sounding tortilla and slapped onto the hot comal. The TV blared out some strange show where the characters looked like cartoons for children, but the jokes were all for adults, and the rude gringo family portrayed all talked to each other with desprecio and discourtesy, as if they only held together from apathy rather than from love. So many of this new kind of cartoon these days, all of her comadres had sighed, that left an empty but sour taste in their mouths, a hunger for meaning still in their hearts. When the tortilla hit the comal, the youngest child, a cinnamon-skinned toddler with dancing gold-brown eyes, left the advantage position at the front of the living room floor and waddled to the kitchen asking, Tortilla? Sí, corazón, this one's for you, said the mother. Just have another minute's paciencia. But as the steam rose from the hot comal and she grabbed another chunk of masa to shape the second tortilla, strange figures began to dance amid the vapors above the toasted corn circle. One by one, the children left the false cartoon to gather around the tortilla and watch. The woman, too, stopped her patting and left the unfinished second tortilla on the plastic counter as the whole family began to see shapes their hearts recognized. And then it happened. Through the clouds of vapor appeared an earth-skinned woman in a bright red dress tied with a black karate belt right above her small, round, pregnant belly. She had a rebozo, a Mexican shawl, woven in a blue-green folkloric fabric, draped gracefully around her head and shoulders and down to the ground. Stars began to appear in the green shawl, which moved around her head softly like the breath of a summer breeze. And rays of sunlight began to shine from behind her, framing her figure. The woman at the stove dropped her dishcloth as she gasped, It's the Virgin of Guadalupe. A crescent moon began to appear below the hem of the red dress, below the Virgin's feet. Then a young black angel appeared, holding up the crescent moon. The family's eyes were transfixed, their heartbeats slow and loud, and no one even noticed as the baby grabbed the raw masa of the unmade second tortilla and began to nibble while shapes danced and moved above the cast iron comal. The Virgin's image was not on the tortilla, it was actually moving and turning above the tortilla in a three-dimensional way that looked like holographic. The Virgin's hands came together in a motion the woman wanted to recognize, then moved apart and turned, rotated, came together. The Virgin looked down at her hands, or maybe at the tortilla, or maybe each one of them wondered, is she looking at me? It was more than an hour before they stopped watching to tell anyone, or maybe they didn't stop at all. Maybe people just dropped by and joined the audience. But soon the whole pueblito of Alma Seca was gathered around the comal, which the woman had wisely thought to turn off before the tortilla burnt. Yet the tortilla had sat on the comal for more than an hour already, she later realized, and never burned. It was, they knew, a miracle. The vapors rising up from the comal, though, never ceased, and became more pearly and filled with light whenever the shapes moved or danced, projected up on the vapors, appearing as if in a dream, but more clearly was the image everyone saw and recognized. It was clearly the Virgin of Guadalupe, but alive and moving, and unlike their TV set, churning out no reruns. Also, unlike their TV set, it made no noise, but kept them somehow involved, interacting. Instead of their voices being drowned out, their voices seemed to be enhanced, richer, clearer, more harmonious with the images projected above the tortilla. They talked among themselves and listened to each other's answers as if they themselves were writing the dialogue to the show. What does it mean? Asked the town nurse. What is she trying to tell us? And cynics and faithful alike came to ask the same question and stare at the daily messages spoken with her hands. Sometimes roses appeared in the background, sometimes Coca-Cola bottles, disposable diapers, books, molcajetes, basketballs, all took their turns in the pictures. It was better than MTV. The images were somehow deeper, realer, as if they had 5 or 6 dimensions, not just 3. People watched, but they also debated, cheered, argued, encouraged their own selves. The pregnant Virgen did strange things. Once, she set a table with mangos and fajitas, guacamole, fresh squeezed limonada, and draped the table with mesquite leaves, red chiles, and tiny white Christmas lights. Then, as if something had just occurred to her, she folded fancy place cards out of notebook paper, left the names blank, and giggled, looking the people straight in the eye. Another time, she sat at a window, stroking a large tabby cat in her lap and looking out over her shoulder across a field of sunflowers. Some said they were bluebonnets just off the highway south of San Antonio. Others saw the blooming red tunas of cactus. Still others swore they smelled sweet orange blossoms, just like the ones in Mama Locha's backyard in Brownsville. After the cat left, the Virgin turned to face the window, and only the back of the recliner was visible with the outline of her elbows. Was she reading? What was she reading? On the left of the window, tamales began to grow from a native olive tree. On the right, a black man with freckles held a laughing baby in his arms. And then something else happened. The people who came to see the images above the tortilla left with something extra, something misterioso under their skin. They noticed that they were sleeping better, laughing deeper. Even people in a hurry walked at a slower pace, enjoying the road. They admired the small, stubborn blooms, so visible now on what used to be ignored as weeds. They heard the sweet melody of the dancing of butterflies landing on overgrown sunflowers. Life in Alma Seca began to seem filled with music. Several viejitos set themselves up nearby with guitars, and people filing past would hear an old voice singing con alma, "No hay que llegar primero, pero hay que saber llegar." Or sometimes, "Celebrate good times, come on," in a Tex-Mex accented rock dialect. The family did not resent the constant flow of visitors. Instead, they would often go outside and share lunches with them. Sometimes the visitors brought fajitas and a little portable barbecue grill, and the aromas and sounds made the front yard feel like the fiesta fairgrounds. Through it all, the Virgen remained quiet but active. It's as if no sound was necessary from her mouth. People provided the sounds from inside their own dreams. Early one morning, when many were sleeping on the ground around her, pillowed by each other's snores, a few of the early risers said they saw her wearing a little black vinyl fisherman's cap, like Selena's, tuning in a boombox and singing toda cool with an invisible microphone in her hands. "Cracklin' Rose, you make me smile." Chala, who knew Neil Diamond's songs by heart, said the Virgin's swinging shoulders and open mouth movements matched that line exactly, and she herself couldn't stop singing it all day long. Lunchtime of the same day, people saw her holographic image walking, really seriously, walking in big, long strides and some comfortable chanclas, arms cocked in right angles, strutting so serious and so real that they moved aside to make room for her between them. When she got closer, a man and a woman appeared beside her in the vapors. She put an arm around each, and they walked together. La Mrs. Henderson, the school cafeteria lady who'd come on the second day and never left since, said she was sure they were relatives, maybe the Virgin's brother and sister. But then Mrs. Henderson, sweet as she was, did always think most Mexicans looked alike anyway. The neighbor ladies started bringing their laundry baskets so they could fold their clothes with everyone else a little closer to the tortilla, and even their husbands joined in folding, and some strangers too. The babies were all happier because there were people all around to hold them y chulearles. No one needed playpens, and even the teenagers smiled more. But not everyone was happy about the tortilla. Local officials, impressed with their job titles, began to grumble. Didn't people realize there were more important things in life than a holy tortilla? The migra grumbled too. With so many devotos, the INS guys figured there had to be some mojados around somewhere. People in the U.S. aren't as religious as those in Mexico, they argued. People in Mexico are more religious about everything, even about tortillas. In addition, the story the Immigration and Naturalization Service got was that some woman standing in a cloud of vapors at some rancho was making gestures and not talking. That sounded like maybe she didn't speak English and wasn't a U.S. citizen, maybe even some involvement with illegal substances that were being burned or smoked or inhaled, so they sent some agents to check it out. They didn't think there'd be any disadvantage to sending Silver Mendez. He never called himself Silverio anymore, and they were sure of his loyalties. Just another one of us, his supervisor said. But when they got there, something was different right away. First off, nobody noticed them. Nobody mumbled or shifted or hightailed it out. They were too busy watching the tortilla. Pretty soon, all of the immigration guys were watching the tortilla too. And Silver had somehow worked himself into a front row seat where he stayed for 3 days solid. That's when the sheriff decided he'd better check it out too. Or at least that's what he told people. His wife said he was just looking for an excuse to go see it like everyone else. Besides, he was always a pushover for a hot tortilla. People were beginning to hang out big time. The family liked the fact that there was more music, more viejitos telling stories, more children playing. The Chicano studies scholars that had flown in from Germany were asking families for their fajitas recipes and writing down the viejitos' song lyrics. Folks would eat and sing, then kind of recycle in to watch the tortilla again, and it would start all over again. She would move, dip down, swing her shoulders, and someone would ask, is she dancing? Tio Nacho said it was to hang on, Sloopy, Sloopy, hang on. But his son insisted it was the last lines of Iris's song from the Goo Goo Dolls. Yeah, look at her lips. I just want you to know who I am. See? Things were really getting out of hand. Outside the county courthouse in Penas Grandes, a man on an accordion regularly played Flaco Jimenez polkas, and 2 traffic ticket violators who came to pay about $90 each started dancing polkas on the way out, and the judge joined in, dancing with them and singing along. Even the Alma Seca Police Department put a wreath of chilies on the door and added tiny white Christmas lights to the back windows of both of its police cars in the middle of July. But what really irritated the Chamber of Commerce was that nobody was selling anything. Some of the local vendors ran off t-shirts marked, I saw the Holy Tortilla, but no one bothered to buy them. People just getting there wanted to get in and see it first before it disappeared. And after people saw it, they didn't care as much about those t-shirts as whatever shirts they already had on. People all over South Texas quit watching TV. National advertisers were angry because sales were down, and local politicians were even angrier because the election was right around the corner and nobody showed up at the free beer political pachangas. They were all watching the tortilla. The family's landlord, smart businessman that he was, tried to sell front row seats and even tried to broker a deal with the nearest TV station to get coverage on Channel 13, but somehow the steady stream of people flowing slowly past the tortilla kept him from even getting a foothold. And when people left, instead of leaving, they just sat outside a while and thought, then got up to get in line again to go see what the Virgin was doing next. The big TV station from Wittliff sent several crews out, but somehow they always came back empty-handed. There was nothing on the tape. Maybe the equipment had malfunctioned, or maybe they'd forgotten to turn the cameras on. No one knew, because the tape had been sent back with someone else. The cameraman had stayed behind to hang out somewhere with the tortilla. An anonymous complaint was brought before the county judge, but the judge, who was speaking an awful lot of Spanish these days, just smiled and said he saw no reason pa quejarse tanto. Just relaxese. Things will work out. The deputy tried to get him to reconsider, but it was close to 5 p.m. and the judge said he had to leave because a primo was coming over and they were going to go watch the tortilla. Word of the Holy Tortilla kept spreading. People from all parts of the world arrived daily, flying into San Antonio and driving south in rented cars, or hitching rides with religious caravans of old minivans, lowriders, and rusted-out gas guzzlers coming from San Antonio's west side, Austin's east side, and Falfurrias downtown. They arrived at all hours of the day and night, pouring in with little concern for hotel or food, but all eager to see what the Virgen was doing now. Everyone seemed to interpret her actions in their own way. A major French theologian came to write her postdoctoral dissertation on it. Some said her decision to write it began the day the Virgin above the tortilla had sat facing the opposite direction, shoulders curled forward, and a small child had said loudly, "Maybe she's reading to her kids." Maria del Rosario said this same moment was what decided her to become a literacy teacher. The Council of Bishops was frankly pissed. None of the regional reports had been sent in. Nothing came into the Archbishop's special collections, and the local priest never returned their calls. In addition, they had received numerous complaints in confidence from the Archbishop in Mexico City, in whose archdiocese the original sighting of the Virgin of Guadalupe had occurred, he reminded them, some 460 years before. The bishops were in the process of calling in a team of experts to challenge the tortilla's authenticity. Word was there were now numerous government agents infiltrating the crowd. The people of Alma Seca and surrounding areas weren't much upset by the ruckus, but the rest of the nation was in quite a stir. Dallas papers reported something about lack of ethnic representation for whites, males, and Protestants, and one newspaper in the Northeast even ran headlines reading, "Steaming Vapors Cult in South Texas Threatens Ethnic Unrest." The scariest part about it seemed, was that no actual footage was available. According to the papers, this was due to a communications blockade by local terrorist groups and overall heightened security. The National Enquirer tried to run a story on it, but every time they assigned someone, that person ended up heading off for South Texas and never coming back. Soon bomb threats were arriving at the courthouse, where the judge just laughed and said, "Que gacho." No one knows who really did it. Some blamed Washington, some blamed Rome. Others said Fidel Castro had a hand in it. Chicano rights activists in California said they had proof that skinheads and other white racist groups were directly involved. Memo Canales, an old Movimiento activist and community organizer, told his friends he strongly suspected the governor, who sprinkled Spanish words into his speeches generously before elections, but never did much for the Spanish-speaking other than to divide their vote. Whoever did it, it was done. 30 packs of plastique were tied together and thrown in a window to land right on top of the tortilla. The tortilla was totally destroyed. The miracle was no one was injured. And except for a lot of dust and smoke and a few leftover regalos from France, Micronesia, and South Africa, the family's home remained much as it had been before the day the Virgin came to dance above a disk of steaming masa. The people of Alma Seca seemed relatively calm about the whole thing, just kind of shrugged their shoulders like at the end of a good honeymoon and went on about their work with a little smile still on their lips. The songs were still sung, the stories still told, and the people said they could still close their eyes and see her, clearly framed by the sun's rays, moving about the daily tasks that they saw reflected in their own lives. Some said that the air in Alma Seca smelled different now, fresher, greener, kind of like corn stalks. Some said their skin did too. The smell of cornstalk of freshness followed the visitors as well, and they went home with a sense they carried something new back with them, something red or folkloric blue-green or quiet or spangled with stars or tiny Christmas lights. Local officials and the Chamber of Commerce breathed a sigh of relief. Washington, Mexico City, Rome all breathed in relief as well. And the governor went back to promising he would improve education, especially for minorities, by rewarding those schools whose test scores were high and punishing those whose scores weren't. And slowly, people began to return to their normal lives, attending the miracle room at the local church and gathering with familia on their front porches. No one remembered the rest of the masa, still in the back of the top shelf of the woman's refrigerator. No one remembered either that the youngest child had eaten of it. Holy Tortilla. I've got to tell you that the child shows up again later in the book, but I won't read you that one. I'm going to slip in something here in the middle of poetry, just because, poets are really stubborn people. They're really subversives. You never get it out of them. Once a poet, always a poet. Ahí te queda, right below your skin. So I am going to read one more piece from the book, but I have to read just one little poem to you. I thought I could get away without it today, but that doesn't happen. You just get an excuse. You see another poet in the audience, you go, oh yeah, I'll read that one. So, I'm going to share with you one that I think has a lot to do with our culture and some of what I try to capture about the culture. The whole act of nurturance, the whole act of feeding someone, of giving to them, even if it's from the very simplest of actions or the very most basic of what you have, is a very powerful action. And so this next poem is called Feeding You, and it's about that whole transmission of culture in very subtle and simple and daily but holy ways, and it's called feeding you. Dear son, I have slipped chile under your skin, carefully sprinkled into the rice, slipped into the bean caldo, smoothed into the avocado, sprinkled, carefully cut into the enchiladas in small bitefuls for you as a toddler, increasing in power and intensity as you grew until it could ignite your soul. I have slipped chile under your skin, drop by fiery drop, until it ignited the sun altar fire in your blood. I have squeezed cilantro into the breast milk, made sure you were nurtured with the fresh taste of green leaves, of wild monte, of unscheduled growth. I have ground the earth of these Americas in my molcajete into a fine and piquant spice and sprinkled it surely into each drop of food until it could expand to fit your soul. Dear son, dear son, dear corn, chile, cilantro son, this is what your mother left you. This is your herencia. This is what your mother fed you to keep you alive. Poesía. You've been very patient, and we started up a little late, so I think just one more piece I'd like to share with you, and I can go funny or I can go light. Well, I can go funny or I can go kind of heavy. Both of them are very short. So you tell me, are you in a funny mood or are you in a heavy mood? Heavy? Heavy, okay. This one is so heavy that there are certain writers that I share it with that go, no, I don't want to read that. So I thought, okay, if even the writers don't want to read it, we're in trouble. This is called The Stuff to Scream With, and it's in the voice of a victim. I don't scream. I ain't never been able to scream. Guess God didn't give me the voice. I just do what I told most of the time. Take care of the kids and don't bother nobody else. I stay quiet like you're supposed to. Once, I tried. I was little. My older cousin Manda, she told me, can't you scream, muchacha? I shook my head. She said, here, do it. I take you someplace where nobody else can hear you. Then you do it. She took me behind the neighbor's garage, next to the empty lot where we used to throw mud balls at the wall and no one could see us. Then she said, go ahead. I opened my mouth and made a sound, but it sounded like someone else's sound, like someone else's voice someplace else. She said, girl, that ain't no scream. She stared at me, studying, daring me, then just figuring. She screamed at the top of her lungs. I looked around, scared we'd get scolded, but we didn't, because there was nobody there to scold us. She screamed again, loud. She screamed a third time, louder this time than all the other screams, and long. And I didn't know why, but I smiled. She smiled too. Then she just looked at me like waiting. I can't, I said. I don't have the stuff to scream with. Everybody got the stuff to scream with. If you can talk, you can scream. Maybe even if you can't talk, you can scream. Try, you'll see. I wanted to tell her, I can't, but she looked at me so hard. Her eyes so much like two black knives that want to cut you, that I opened my mouth and pushed out the breath, all funny sounding and low and full of air, but it sounded like a sound. It didn't sound like a scream. Try again, she said. Just do it. Think of the scary movies. And I thought of those ladies that let out those screams in the movies, like everyone turns around and you hear it real cutting through, like something more than speaking, more than singing, more like from inside you and more important than any other sound around. And I wanted, and I opened my mouth, and well, something came out, but it sounded silly, like a shout high up and too quiet, like someone acting in a school play that lets out a sound in a way they're not supposed to. She was looking at me so hard and with a frown so down that I opened my mouth again without her even telling me to, but then I closed it because I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to make that funny sick sound again for both of us to hear. I can't. Then Manda said, just do it. Then Manda took her strong hands and her zigzaggy fingernails and grabbed up a piece of my stomach like you would grab a piece of a bread that you were going to tear off of the bolillo. And she pulled and twisted and tried to tear off that piece of my skin. I sucked in the air and it made a sound, but the sound didn't go out like a scream. It just went in like a loud breath. I was scared because Manda had never tried to hurt me before. And I was feeling hurt too because I'd always liked her before that. Finally, I whined a little quiet, "Ow," and she let go. Then she just sat down on the old bricks thrown on the ground and put her head on her fist. I stood there, scared to say anything, and my eyes stinging from the red and purple-white stripes on the skin above my shorts. After a while, I realized that she wasn't mad at me, so I sat down too and wiped the muddy streaks of mocos and tears away. "Don't you want to hit me or anything?" she asked, all gentle-like. I shook my head. "You can scream real loud now if you want to," she said, more soft now than I'd ever heard her talk, almost like she was asking me something, like to have a cookie or something. We just sat there with the weeds taller than both of us. We sat there a long while until my breathing was real slow again and the muddy streaks on my face were dry. Then she reached in her pocket and got out a gingerbread marranito, just a crumbly half of one, like the head and maybe 3 legs. It didn't have its bottom anymore, like she'd probably been eating it all day for snacks, little at a time. And she took the whole thing, not just a part of it, and she tore it in half and gave me half. I guess she felt bad that she'd cut me and I hadn't even gotten a scream for it. And we ate slow together and all quiet. So see, even Manda knows that I don't scream, and Manda's smart on those things. But every time I'd see her after that, she'd always look at me real quiet at first, like almost mad. And then we'd go on just normal, playing and talking and stuff. But at the end, before she'd leave, she'd always hit me one good, like when no one was looking. But I never screamed, not even then. And we went on and growed up. And every once in a while, like at Tia's house making tamales, or at my folks' place when I'd see her, she'd ask, "You ever learned to scream yet?" And I'd just look at her, and she'd turn away, knowing the answer. And just once, when we were at Grandma Salazar's house, she sat next to me while I was watching The Price is Right, and some lady was screaming every time Bob Barker said what was the prizes they were giving away, and she said to me, "You got the scream inside you. I know. All you need's the way to get it out." But Manda moved to some place in California, like Fresno or something, after she got married, and I don't hardly see her anymore. And most of the time, everything's real quiet. And I just do what my husband says, and most times there's no trouble. The kids are growing, and Raul's almost as tall as Armandita now, with the baby not far behind now that he's walking. And my neighbor, she screams all the time. Sometimes I just sit and watch her from my porch. She has 5 kids, so it's always, "Ay, the baby's gonna fall off the high chair. Ay, Juanita's in the shoe polish. Ay, Maria's playing basketball in the street. Ay, viene una trocota. Ay, I can hear it coming." And Jose Raul, my husband, calls her La Escandalosa. And he comes home from work and says, "Can you turn the TV up a little? It's after supper, so she's gonna start now. Ya va a comenzar La Escandalosa." And I smile. But this morning, I took my kids to the park. And we were having a good time. Raulito and Armandita on the swings, and the baby in the sandbox, todo contentito, full of sand, and throwing it around like it was water. Then I looked back at the swing, and Raulito was going real high and okay, but Armandita's swing was empty. And I look at the slide, and I look at the water fountain, and I look at the seesaw, and she wasn't there. And my heart, it goes up in my mouth like it's gonna fly out. And I grab the baby, sand and all, and start running all around like in circles, in and out of bushes, and trying to go all over the park all at the same time, not knowing which way first, and shouting to Raul, "Stay on the swing, stay on the swing, don't go nowheres, nowheres." I run to the fence by the big trees, then the side of the bathroom, then behind the bathroom. And then I find him in the bushes, his old white hand on his dirty pants zipper, and a lollipop in the other hand, and him saying, "Shh, shh," and smiling ugly at Armandita, and her looking up at the lollipop, all different colors swirled together, like the kind she always asking for at the grocery store, but they're 79 cents each, and we get the little ones, one flavor that are 12 for $1, and the shh, shh, rumbles through my ears loud like a bulldozer, with the engine breathing through me, and then the engine explodes. And before I know what I'm gonna do, I knock him down and hit his hands with that big rock. I don't know when I got the rock or when I put down the baby, but I just keep hitting his hand till I smash that lollipop all to little pieces of color you can't see no more. And I can hear myself breathing hard with each time I hit with the rock. And I can feel him twist and moan and try to get away, but I on him hard and heavy, and he can't go nowhere. And I say, scream, 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 scream. And from somewhere far away, long away, I hear, I scared, Daddy. I scared. No, you're not. I hurt, Daddy. I hurt. No, you don't. I no want to. Please, I no want to. Shh, be quiet. Go sleep. It won't hurt you. Shh, do this for Daddy, okay? Do what Daddy wants, okay? Cállate, huerca. Cut out that crying or te doy un paletazo. But I want to cry. It hurts. You don't know what hurts. Quit crying or I'll give you something to really cry about. Shh, nothing hurts. Just cállate. Shut up. It don't hurt. If you scream, The tears and the mocos were coming out of me like water, like a rio so full and flowing bubbly, while I whisper, scream, scream. And then I hear a scream, a long, terrible, deep scream, like years long and hurts loud. With all the stuff it's got scream, and then I see Armandita looking at me, all surprised, her eyes real open, and a crowd of people all around staring at me. And I look down, and I see this old man, all barbudo and old clothes and half drunk, maybe, I don't know. And I think, Jose Raul's going to get mad at me for beating up this old man. And the old man, he looks bad. So I get off and leave him there. And I take Armandita by one hand and the baby by the other. And I walk to the swings where Raulito is still going so high, so fast. And I walk all three of them all the way to the store where I get Armandita one of those lollipops with lots of colors like she say she want, just the way she want, with her voice strong that don't ever gonna be shut up by nobody. Thank you. Preguntas? I'll take questions if you got them. Should we take a question or two? You have questions, or you want to just go mill around and do reception and signing? It's up to you. Questions. You have questions? Preguntas? It's kind of hard to come out of that story and do preguntas, I know, but sorry, you said you wanted heavy. It wasn't my fault, it was your fault. Yes, ma'am.
How long did you work on the pieces in this?
On the different pieces? Different ones came out at different times. This is over a period of time. Chencho's Cow, which is the first story in here, may be the best short story I've ever written. And Chencho's Cow came in the middle of a night. And I wasn't asking for it. I was tired and I had gone to bed and I had worked late and I turned in the work, the university type stuff, and finished at like 1 in the morning and gone to bed. And this line kept coming through my head, which is the two lines, actually, the same two lines that begin the story, which is it all started when Chencho's Cow kicked over a pot of beans, the very pot of beans that he had prepared with the very, all like that. So, and it came to me, and I kept saying, leave me alone. I don't know Chencho. I don't know his cow. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm tired. And I kept saying, leave me alone, and he wouldn't go away. And so I got up and wrote it down. I wrote about a paragraph and went to sleep. And the next morning, I got up and pretty much wrote the rest of it in a day or two. That's the lucky ones. Then there's other ones that you struggle. The one I just read, the last one, was also one of those fast ones that comes to you and it all gets written out. And you go back and you tweak a word here or there and you edit for a couple of years before it's quite what you want it to be. But basically it's written in a day. And then there's the ones that, there's one in here that I love called Inheritance, and it's about the sense of place and an old woman reminding people that the dirt is us. We're from it and it's from us and we own it. And that one I wrote, but then I wrote another 20 versions of. So each one takes a different amount of time. So I can't even tell you, I guess, what the time span is on these. All the way, I guess Chencho's Cow was around 1989. And then a lot of them were in the late 90s, and about 3 or 4 of them were right before the book came out. So they come when they come. They're like kids sometimes, you know. You can try conception or contraception, but it doesn't always work. So anyway, you know. Another question? Yes, ma'am.
You read them like with a Mexican accent, you know, the way we talk here. Is that how they're written, or?
Yeah, that's how those are the characters. It's them. I'm very character driven. There's some people that are plot driven. They say, well, I want a story about a Mexican 16-year-old who's in an Anglo high school and blah, blah, blah. I don't do that. I get to know the characters first. The character introduces itself to me, and I kind of follow where they go. And so the characters are what lead the way. And so these are, not all of my writings are about Mexican-American characters. And some are kind of generic, but in this collection, it's very, very South and South Central Texas. I just don't see South Central Texas without there being a strong Mexican-American influence in it. And so a lot of these are Mexican-American characters. Some are, you know, like the last woman that I read from very low educational levels. Some are, you know, doctoral level and everything in between. You know, just a whole variety of characters. The other thing that happens, I did not read you I Just Can't Bear It, which was it's a very easy, very theatrical piece to read. It's very funny, and it's about a funeral in a small Texas town, and it gets into some of the prejudices and some of the interactions. But one of the things that I think is very important is to portray a character or a culture or a people authentically, which means you don't make them all heroes. You know, if you look at some of the early Chicano movies that came out, I won't mention any names, but came out like in the early 70s, all the Chicanos were good guys and all the Anglos were bad guys, and they came out kind of flat, you know, because they weren't real human beings. The Chicanos had no faults, they had no depth. The Anglos had no virtues, they had no depth either. And so to have a real character, you have to say everything about them, the good and the bad and the ugly. And so in the story about the funeral, the I Just Can't Bear It story, it's a very funny story, but it talks about how our culture, like other cultures, gets going on chisme and gossip, and all of a sudden somebody's wonderful reputation gets all torn down in the process of a mistake at a funeral because this woman shows up in the back row bawling and bawling, I can't take it, and they can't figure out who she is. They start figuring she's a mistress, she's a girlfriend, oh my God, some secrets never come out till the grave, and they start worrying about this, just like any group of people are going to do. We're human, and so you have this happen, and it's not till the end of the story that you find out that she came into the wrong visitation room. It's the wrong person that she's crying about. Oh, you know, Jimmy? Yeah, you know, this is Jimmy? I thought it was Chemo. I was sure they said it was Chemo at the door. So she walks out the hall, all upset that, you know, who the hell is Jimmy? And, you know, leaves. So those are the kinds of things I love to do with writing, which is to show the whole person. When you love a human being, or if you hate a human being, either way, you've got to show the whole shebang. You know, we don't just love them because they're perfect and sweet and look like butterflies and whatever. You know, they've got their travesuras to them too, and so that's, you know, part of the portrayal that I like to do. It gets people angry sometimes. They want me to write either nothing bad about Anglos or nothing bad about Mexican Americans or nothing bad about whatever character. Can't do that. You know, we're very funny as a species. We're a hilarious species. We're a comedy, you know, or a tragedy, whichever way you want to look at it. And so then there's the tragic stories in here too. Like Irene wanted me to read the El Mojado No Existe, and I was like, oh God, but it's such a tragedy. They're going to leave crying. So instead I read you about child abuse. Anyway, cheer you up a little, you know, at any rate. Another question? No? Gracias. Yeah, well, okay.
Are your characters based on real people?
Yeah, of course. They all blend in. I mean, I don't always know it. Sometimes it's not till later that you look at somebody and say, oh, is that who that was? You know, the dead character in the funeral, some of the aspects of him were based on a elderly uncle of mine whose funeral I went to. And I'm still on the funeral thing, you know. I'm in that generation where we go from funeral to funeral, and so there's a lot of humor to be had from funerals. And I'm working on a play right now called Muertos pero Muertitos, which is all funeral humor. Sorry, you know. Yeah, they're based on real situations that come, and then some of them are made up. As a writer, you pull all this together, and you blend, and then the character comes to life. The one that's on paper comes to life, and it takes its own life. I had a poem. Poetry is supposed to be truth, you know, and I had a poem about my tia Sofia, and it's a very famous poem, and I performed it. The little old lady she was talking about coming through the audience was tia Sofia, and she had her own idiosyncrasies and whatever, but over the years, as I performed her, she's changed, she's grown, she's a whole new character. Tia Sofia died years ago, and she's a different person. So, you know, my family, when they get in the audience, it's like, well, Sofia wasn't exactly like that. No, she wasn't, because characters take off. They become their own person. So that's what happens to you. It has to come to life. If you're just writing about a person, and that person isn't caught in here, unless you follow that person day to day and you see what they do and you test things on them, which we wouldn't want to do, it'd be unethical. You know, you have to let this character live. And so, as A. Robert Lee, the great Americanist autobiographer from England, says, the greatest fictional word in the English language is I. And the greatest nonfiction is fiction, because in fiction you're free to put it all together in a way that expresses the way things are out there. If you had to go out there and experience it, you'd never be able to get it inside one story or one book. So you compress it. And so the lines between fiction and nonfiction are very fluid. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Oh, she's got a question up there. Okay. Sorry. I can't hear you. Yes.
The story that you read, you were talking about a corn tortilla, but the picture looks like a flower.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm glad.
I was just wondering if you know, if that was something that you had looked at or somebody else did the cover.
The graphic designer that did this was Thelma Ortiz Moraida, who is just a wonderful artist and designer, and I respect very much. To tell you the truth, the publisher was going to take an old family Bible and just replace the word Bible with tortilla. He was going to scan it in and do it that way, and I thought, that's a little... I mean, I'm already going to get lynched for some of the sacrilege that's in here. I didn't read you the super sacrilegious parts. I said, you know, so maybe we better avoid the straight takeoff on that. And Thelma came up with this, and when she first came up with it, it was even worse. It really looked like the chalice and the communion wafer, but it was a tortilla and a pot of beans. And so we looked at that for a while too to figure out whether I was going to be lynched again. And finally, she said, well, what kind of bean pot did you have in mind? And I pulled one off my shelf, and that's my bean pot right there, the one with the flour. The tortilla above it, she wanted to give that impression of a virgin of Guadalupe, but not so much of it that it didn't leave it in the reader's eye, in the eye of the perceiver, of the beholder. So that's why she left it. And I was very pleased with the cover. And it's all beat up looking. Don't think that you got an old faded out, beat up copy. She did that. She scanned it in that way to look like an old book. And I said, wow, this is great. Even when this book is old, it's going to look good, because it's going to look like it did from the beginning. So anyway, thank you very much.